When I first played God of War years ago, I remember myself enjoying it, but a few years later, I decided to play it again, and I found myself not enjoying it nearly as much as I did when I first played it. Granted, the second time I played it on Give Me God of War difficulty, and that mode is known for being unbalanced. But the difficulty wasn't even the only issue I had with the game. I started noticing way more problems than when I did the first time I played it. I actually didn't even end up finishing the game the second time around. So I decided to look back at this game and decide if it was really worth all the praise, and if it still holds up today. First, let's talk about the visuals. The visuals in this game still hold up perfectly fine today. This game is really pushing the limits of the PS4. It was nice to just walk around and enjoy the scenery. All the realms look distinctly different from each other, and they all have their own feel to them. I think the gameplay was decent for the most part. The combat is a pretty mixed bag for me. It's not the worst combat ever, but it's certainly not the best. The combat isn't as slow as something like Dark Souls, but it does feel a bit too stiff for me. I also think the camera is way too close. The camera should be zoomed out during combat. Like, combat encounters feel too tight and claustrophobic, especially when you're fighting a lot of enemies. Like I said in the intro, I think Give Me God of War difficulty was difficult in an unfair way. The enemies did way too much damage and I did way too little, and the enemies were way too aggressive. Like, it was seriously giving me Dark Souls vibes, and not in a good way. But this time I played it on Give Me a Challenge, and I think it was mostly fair. All the enemies telegraph their attacks clearly for the most part. But there are times when the game throws too many enemies at you, and the gameplay isn't fast or responsive enough to handle these types of situations well. The enemies also have way too much health. Because of this, the combat encounters drag out way too long, and my hits seem less impactful. I don't feel like a God of War, especially when it takes a whole minute to kill one Draugr. There were even times when I think Give Me a Challenge was too annoying, and I had to turn the difficulty down even more. You might just tell me to get good, but I think there are some real balancing issues in this game. I also had problems with the autolock. I don't think the autolock was good in this game. I barely felt the need to use it, but when I did use it, it would regularly drop targets and automatically lock on to different targets. This feels clunky and annoying. I think the RPG elements work fine here. It was satisfying leveling up and getting new gear and abilities. There seems to be a decent amount of variety in how you can play the game, whether that's focusing more on strength and defense or focusing more on runic abilities. I also have some problems with the enemies. I don't like the enemies where I was required to use Atreus to beat them. Not only is it annoying mechanically, but it also makes Kratos seem way less cool and badass. Kratos' axe is too slow for the Revenant, but not Atreus' bow. The God of War is too slow for an enemy in close quarters, but his novice son can hit him with a bow from range perfectly fine. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. I don't mind fighting with Atreus, I just don't like the fact that you have to use him for some encounters. With that being said, the enemy variety was okay for the most part, but I do think the game reuses too many enemies for the boss encounters. It's like as the game went on, the combat just got worse and more annoying for me. I also wish Atreus didn't give me so many hints, at least not as frequently as he does. Atreus just talks way too much in general during combat. The game does have a decent amount of areas to explore. I love Midgard for the most part. It was really beautiful and had the most stuff to explore. I don't really like Alfheim that much. I think the Dark Elves were kind of annoying, and I think they're way too spammy and aggressive. There's also the part where you have to fight a bunch of enemies while you move down a super narrow path. This part just feels sloppy and annoying. I think Helheim was just okay. The aesthetic wasn't very interesting to me. The enemies weren't too annoying to fight, but I don't like the part where you have to fight off a bunch of enemies in this ship and you constantly have to relight these fires. This was just tedious and annoying. I don't like Niflheim at all. It's easily the least interesting place aesthetically. It's just a bunch of fog with some enemies to fight. Pretty lame. Also don't like Muspelheim. This realm is super linear and mostly consists of tedious challenges that you have to do to progress in the realm until you reach a boss fight. Also, the aesthetic in this realm isn't very exciting. There's also this bad elevator sequence where you have to fight a bunch of enemies in this enclosed space. There's just too many times where you have to fight off hordes of enemies while moving slowly towards something. These parts just feel like a really lazy way to artificially extend the game's runtime. This makes the game way less replayable than it could have been. I think the boss fights were pretty solid for the most part. It's one of the best parts of the game. The fights are a real spectacle and the combat is fair and fun, for the most part. This is the part of the game that felt the most fair, with exceptions. But that's not to say that they're perfect. They still suffer from issues. Firstly, I don't like that some of them spawn extra enemies. This is annoying and it's a clear example of artificial difficulty. In fact, there's multiple examples of artificial difficulty in these fights, like taking your sight away. I also think there's too many slow moments in this game, whether that's carrying something or going down an elevator or just the game forcing you to walk slowly for some reason. I think the pacing was a little too slow for an action RPG. I think the side quests were fine, but it was nothing too special. I like the Valkyries for the most part. It's definitely the best side activity in the game. They were mostly fun and fair to fight. Their moves are also varied enough for all of them to feel different, although there were some that I don't like so much. I think Kara was super annoying. She would be fine if I only had to fight her, but she constantly spawns more enemies that get progressively stronger as you kill them. This is another example of unfun, artificial difficulty. It would have been better if there was a way to get rid of the extra enemies altogether. Like maybe if we're fast enough, we can stop her from summoning them. But that's not the case. I think Gearful was definitely challenging, but not overly so. Some moves were harder to react to than others, but the fight was still manageable. All her moves were telegraphed properly, and it felt like a fair fight overall. And it was a satisfying victory. I think Hildur was fair, but the run back was annoying and unnecessary. Gunnar, Orun, and Rota were all fun and fair to fight. But I think Sigrun was too difficult. She does way too much damage and she's way too spongy, even on the easiest difficulty. There were also some attacks that I felt were impossible to react to. The secondhand soul side mission was okay, I guess, and we get a few good exchanges between Kratos and Atreus. The rest of the side missions were just whatever. They're not very memorable. I also don't think the story was very engaging either. Like most things in this game, it wasn't awful, but it also wasn't great. I have a big problem with the dialogue in this game. The dialogue isn't very subtle and it's too on the nose. Atreus, Kratos, and pretty much everyone just says exactly what comes to their mind. It leaves very little room for interpretation from the audience, and it makes the dialogue boring to listen to. Like when Kratos and Atreus talk about Faye, they just talk about how epic she was. We don't even get one flashback of them together. There's just way too much telling instead of showing in this game. The dialogue also consists of too much exposition, and it's not even told in an interesting way most of the time. The characters just say it outright. The only time I was interested in the exposition that was given was when Freya explained the world tree, but that's because there were some interesting visuals happening while she was doing it. There's a huge lack of subtlety in this story. Like when Atreus learns that he's a god and he starts acting super arrogant and rude to everyone right away. Like right after he learns this, all he does is brag about being a god and he just becomes a complete asshole. He even kills someone. He acts almost nothing like this before. He becomes even more annoying than how he was before. But then Kratos gives him a talk and he stops acting like this immediately. This transition happens in a few missions, mind you. This game is very on the nose with its themes, and we don't get enough time to properly flesh out character arcs because the story feels so rushed in many places. The characters are a mixed bag as well. I like Brock. He's a crazy old guy that upgrades our weapons. You can't hit him too much. I also like Sindri, and I like the interactions between Sindri and Kratos. It's funny to see how serious and threatening Kratos is towards Sindri, who's super cowardly. I think Baldur was okay, but nothing special. He's a crazy evil guy who wants to kill his mother out of revenge, and we have to kill him because of that. I did like Baldur's death scene. It was powerful seeing him finally being able to feel, and he dies in peace as he feels the snow on his body. That was one of the only scenes that actually made me emotional. I don't think the narrative of Baldur and Freya was handled very well. I don't care about the narrative with Baldur and Freya because we see next to nothing about their relationship. All we know is that Freya put a spell on Baldur to save his life, but it caused him not to feel anything. All the scenes that were supposed to be emotional felt really forced to me. Why didn't the writers flesh out this relationship more? It's kind of a big part of the story. We get one flashback kinda in Helheim, but it's not even a good flashback. It's just Baldur looking at hallucinations of his past. We don't even have a full cutscene of this, and we barely get any time to explore this narrative. Therefore, I don't feel any emotion towards the scenes that were supposed to be emotional. Freya was fine, I guess. I don't really feel any strong emotions towards her because her character isn't fleshed out well. She takes a liking to Kratos and Atreus super quickly, even after they almost killed her friend and a super rare animal. It just doesn't feel earned. She has no reason to like these two this much after just meeting them. Freya is just a nice witch who lives in a tree. Tortoise thing. Overall, Freya was just kind of boring. Mimir is just kind of there. He's a head that we carry around that mostly just spouts exposition. I seriously think he was added in the story just to give us exposition. He's boring. There's not much to say here. I think Kratos is perfectly fine. He's badass, intimidating, but he's overall a decent dude. He's stoic, but he expresses enough emotion for us to relate to him. He also has some funny moments of deadpan humor as well, which is also nice. Kratos is a pretty simple character. It's hard to mess him up. He's fine here. Although I don't like Atreus that much. In fact, I find him quite annoying sometimes. I think he talks way too much. I don't need him to constantly give me hints and give remarks when I'm doing a puzzle. I don't need him to constantly remind me that an enemy is about to attack me. Just zoom out the camera so I can actually see the enemies behind me. Again, Atreus' whole narrative is just super on the nose that I can't really get invested in it. His dialogue is pretty bad. There weren't that many cute moments, and he just felt like an annoying kid for most of the time. Overall, the story was a solid 6 out of 10. Not good, but also not terrible. So yeah, I think God of War 2018 is kind of overrated. I've had some fun with the game, but as my playthrough progressed, I began to see more and more flaws with the game, and I started to get more annoyed with it. I still think this game has some replayability. It's not an awful game. I just don't think the game deserved as much praise as it got. So yeah, that's my thoughts on God of War 2018. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you want. Patreon in the description if you want to support, and bye.